Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
The man had made some threatening comments to the police concerning his own well-being before starting a fire within the vehicle.
A suspicious van prompts police to shut down the only bridge across Okanagan Lake for hours, raising concerns about other ways to get around. Plus, TransLink says a big cash injection from Ottawa will help build new bus routes and upgrade fleets. But day-to-day costs are still a massive challenge.
This does nothing to reduce that operational needs. We're still at that $600 million.
And
it wasn't like natural or healthy because no one got to be with their friends.
5 years ago, the first cases of COVID-19 were detected in BC. We look at the impact on students and schools forced to radically change learning.
I've only had 3 normal years of high school.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. It has been a frustrating day for drivers and commuters in and around Kelowna. A suspicious vehicle prompted police to close the W.R. Bennett Bridge for hours. As Brady Strachan shows us, the shutdown highlights a long-standing issue in the region, the lack of a second route across Okanagan Lake.
Traffic is now moving steadily behind me here, but for most of the day, there were no vehicles allowed on the W.R. Bennett Bridge after police say a driver used his van to block the bridge, claiming there were explosives inside. Police say it happened a little before 4 in the morning. When emergency responders arrived, they found a troubling scene.
The man had made some threatening comments to the police concerning his own well-being before starting a fire within the vehicle.
He says officers were able to get the man out of the van and take him to hospital, but concerns over what was in the van prompted police to close the bridge in both directions, while they called a bomb squad from the Lower Mainland. The W.R. Bennett Bridge is the only route across Okanagan Lake, connecting Kelowna and West Kelowna. The closure left thousands of drivers stranded on both sides, the only detour being a windy and narrow road, adding more than 2 hours to the journey. Many truckers waited along the highway or in parking lots.
We were going to take the alternate route, but it's a little sketchy over there and just reiterates the need for a second crossing or an upgraded road anyway.
Well, I think we got to be proactive on things like that. I know it costs money and there's always that bottom line, but at the end of the day, it's just if these things continue to happen, we got to have alternative routes.
As for another bridge across Okanagan Lake, the BC government hasn't made that project a priority, saying the current bridge can handle traffic flows until at least 2040. The BC Conservative Party did make the issue part of its election campaign during last year's provincial election. Brady Strachan, CBC News, West Kelowna.
TransLink is celebrating a massive cash injection from the federal government, $663 million over 10 years from a national fund for public transport. It will help pay for capital projects, but not the operating costs that the Transit Authority says could force it to drastically cut service. We spoke with our municipal affairs reporter, Chad Pawson, earlier. Chad, first of all, tell us more about this cash.
Yeah, Dan, this money comes from a new federal fund, the Canada Public Transit Fund. This was announced last year. It's $3 billion for public transit initiatives across the whole country. TransLink now knows what share it's getting, basically $63 million a year for the next 10 years, starting next year. And to the average Metro Vancouver resident, they're going to see this as good news. Often when we hear about TransLink, we hear bad news, how cash-strapped TransLink is. Or if you're on a bus and it's crowded, you wonder, why is this bus so crowded? Now, the thing to note about this money announced is it's for capital projects. So this is for replacing aging buses, improving rail lines, maybe fixing up transit stations or building new ones. The biggest, most exciting thing that was talked about today from a news conference announcing this money is that it could help pay for bus rapid transit for the North Shore. Now, that's something we've been talking about for 10 years as a way to ease congestion on the 2 bridges going back and forth between the North Shore and congestion all the way to Metrotown and Burnaby. So some of this money could be used for that. It's an issue that civic leaders hear a lot about. Here is City of North Vancouver Mayor Linda Buchanan.
I feel their frustration. They're frustrated, and not only are they frustrated, employers are frustrated because many of the people who come to the North Shore are coming for their jobs, and there's no competitive way to get here right now other than the car.
And Chad, remind us what this money is not for.
Yeah, it's an important thing to recognize, Dan. Again, it's for capital projects. TransLink's biggest problem is its operational budget. So that's paying for salaries, paying for fuel, paying to expand service in our region, which is rapidly growing. Our population is increasing. The money announced is not for those things. TransLink's saying it's going to face a $600 million a year shortfall starting next year if something doesn't happen, threatening cuts up to as much as 50% to transit service by the end of this year if something doesn't change. Now, there is a chance for more federal funding as early as the end of March, so waiting on that. Also, the provincial government campaigned in October to bring bus rapid transit to the North Shore, to make sure the subway expansion to UBC goes through, other transit initiatives across the province. This is a government that says it's serious about transit. CEO of TransLink, Kevin Quinn, said today that the conversations with the province about funding are going well, so waiting to hear more about the province jumping in here as well to help fund appropriate transit for our region.
All right. Chad Pawson reporting. Chad, thanks very much. To yet another long-standing transportation issue, False Creek and the boats that are left to sink or just wash ashore. Recovering and disposing of what's left of them is an expensive bill usually paid for by taxpayers. Other vessels are simply an eyesore. As Belle Puri reports, either way, all are a hazard.
Diving for dead boats is technical and detailed.
We're going to see if maybe it's pinned on the rig, like if the rig is in the dirt or hooked up on something and thus holding it on its side.
The sailboat has been stuck for days, possibly a week.
Okay, so where the keel used to be, big gaping hole.
The plan is to strap it to airbags and tow it out.
I want it between the shaft and the strut, and then ahead of the winches.
Problematic vessels are regularly removed for the City of Vancouver, its Park Board, and Transport Canada. The process can cost from $4,000 to $100,000. This bill is estimated at $8,000.
I think we just finished boats number 78 and 79 since March of 21. It's a lot for the False Creek Basin and for Granville Island, and certainly for our shop.
Where some see a future sunk boat, others see a home.
Sorry about the mess.
In 6 years, Griffin Shields has lived on 6 boats.
One of them I pulled off a beach, not this one.
Conditions are often bad.
There's some people here who it's a step above a tent. They don't have heat in their boats. They can't cook, and they have to use the washroom on shore and stuff, and no holding tanks and that sort of thing.
Boats beyond their best before date are expensive to maintain. It's one reason why many are abandoned. The City of Vancouver reports at any given time, less than 10% of boats in False Creek have valid permits.
Derelict boats release engine oil, antifreeze, and a variety of toxins that contaminate the environment. There have been long-standing concerns that False Creek and the inlet are becoming a dumping ground.
Victoria Coast Guard Radio, Victoria Coast Guard Radio, Sarah and Claire.
People distressed by the situation say the problem is there's no overall coordinating agency to regulate the water.
The city has known about this problem since 1929, when it commissioned the first inquiry into why nobody was in charge. 1929. And every 15 or 20 years, governments and responsible agencies, they say, we've got to do something about False Creek because nobody is in charge.
False Creek jurisdiction is shared by Vancouver Police, the city, the Park Board, Transport Canada, and the Canadian Coast Guard.
Ultimately, what we're trying to do is help clean up False Creek, alleviate the congestion, and address those community concerns that have arisen as a result of the overcrowding issue here on the water.
The Coast Guard and Transport Canada administer the Wrecked, Abandoned and Hazardous Vessels Act. It carries penalties up to $50,000. Records show only 4 fines have been issued since the law was implemented 6 years ago. Often that's because ownership of abandoned boats is as murky as the water. There are calls for Parks Canada to declare False Creek a national urban marine park.
It is precious. Let's start respecting it, and let's treat it as if it's something that people come in and they go, thank you. Thank you for maintaining it.
It's taken 3 hours to get the sailboat unstuck and on its final journey to the boatyard.
We will spend a couple of hours removing the recyclable materials, like all of the metals essentially, and then we're going to crush the plastic, or cut it in pieces and throw it in a dumpster and send it to the landfill. That's what happens to it.
With that, there is now one less derelict boat in a waterway where there's no end in sight. Belle Puri, CBC News, Vancouver.
West Vancouver police say a snowboarder reported missing on Friday has died. The 21-year-old man had been snowboarding with friends on Cypress Mountain. The mountain ski patrol and North Shore Rescue located the person in a gully. They tried to save him, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. On January 27th, 5 years ago, the first cases of COVID-19 were detected in our province. The pandemic turned much of our daily lives right upside down, including public education. Our John Hernandez looks back at how students and schools fared during those trying years.
A lot can change in 5 years. Just ask these high schoolers who were all in elementary school when the virus upended daily life.
I just remember sitting at home. It was pretty tragic. I mean, nothing much to do. It was boring.
It wasn't like natural or healthy because no one got to be with their friends.
The first case of COVID-19 in BC was detected on January 27th, announced publicly a day later. On February 22nd, schools in the Fraser Health region warned of possible exposure. On March 4th, schools in BC began canceling international trips. On March 11th, Donald Trump suspended travel from Europe to the U.S., the NBA halted its season, and Tom Hanks revealed he had COVID. Then on March 17th, K-12 schools across BC were suspended indefinitely, forcing teachers to shift their classes online.
Such a sudden shift in such a large structure as public education, there's a lot to take on. And at the same time, everybody was dealing with whatever issues they had for themselves and their other loved ones and their children.
A new way of learning that wasn't always easy for kids.
It wasn't that good, really, because I think the in-school experience is really important, and we didn't get that.
I find it was really difficult to learn online because I learn better like when I'm in groups of people.
That increase a lot of student anxiety and stress because you're asking students now to engage in a new form of learning.
This researcher says younger grades struggled the most, and the experience wasn't the same for everyone.
On the background of all of this were equity issues. Now you have some students who had access to digital technologies, access to internet, and others who did not.
And we're still dealing with gaps that created. We're still dealing with students who have some different needs from either the period of disconnection, parts they missed in their education, and the young ones still adjusting.
Many still in school, thankful things have mostly gone back to normal.
I've only had 3 normal years of high school, so it's nice to have that.
The classrooms once again full, but the learning challenges faced by some students are far from over. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
Darius Madavi, our science and climate specialist, here with a look at the weather and change in the air.
Yes, that's right. Now, a couple more days of sunshine if you're in southern BC. That ridge of high pressure keeping us sunny and dry, but some moisture starting to head into the north, and that's why, even though it looks like we're still fairly calm across the province, we do have a winter storm warning in place up around Stewart. There's also an air quality warning around Prince George because of that high pressure keeping particulate matter close to the surface. But here on the south coast, things still seem pretty calm. That doesn't change until we get later into this week. Wednesday, we may start to see a little bit of precipitation on the North Island, but it's not until Thursday that it starts to spread down and should reach us Thursday night here on the Lower Mainland and the South Island. Dan?
Okay, thanks very much, Darius.
Thank you.
January 27th is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and this year marks 80 years since prisoners were freed from the Auschwitz concentration camp. Vancouver City Hall is lit up in yellow in remembrance of the victims and survivors of the Holocaust. We'll have more on the Day of Remembrance later in the program. With Donald Trump's tariff threats looming, some Canadian premiers are considering a ban on American alcohol. How that might go down after this.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
Uncover the good, the bad, and everything in between on CBC's new daily podcast, This is Vancouver. Join CBC host Stephen Quinn on an adventure to uncover the hidden gems and highlight the authentic local stories in your community. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts and never miss a special programming series, event, or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter at cbc.ca/Vancouver inbox.
Heads up, outdoor enthusiasts. The Canada Border Services Agency says it will no longer issue permits to enter Canada on the Pacific Crest Trail. Instead, you'll now have to enter at a designated port of entry. This trail is over 4,000 kilometers long, running from the Mexico border to BC's Manning Park. Now hikers hoping to cross into this country will have to detour to either Souyus or Abbotsford first. They're about 100 kilometers from the trail. The manager of Manning Park Resort says this will impact business.
We often get to see people in the restaurants and the accommodation for a day or two as they recover and just enjoy themselves once they're here. So, that's several hundred people over the course of basically the fall.
The U.S. already has a similar restriction in place for southbound hikers. The closure comes as U.S. President Donald Trump pressures Canada to do more to secure its border, though the CBSA doesn't say if the decision is linked to that. At least 2 premiers say it may be time to ban American booze in the face of Donald Trump's tariff threats. As Yvette Brent shows us, craft distillers see some opportunities.
Yeah, Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey from Jim Beam.
BC Premier David Eby says if he has to, he'll stop Jack Daniels and Jim Beam at the border.
If they're not going to abide by our trade agreements, then neither are we.
They is the new U.S. administration. Donald Trump says he's considering a 25% tariff on Canadian imports, and Eby's threat is to bar access to the BC market for U.S. alcohol.
Our decision not to purchase American alcohol would definitely send a message. It is one of the things that could be on the table to respond to these tariffs. They are completely unjustified.
Walk into any Canadian liquor store and you will find American booze from California to Kentucky to Tennessee.
Why does every single restaurant have Jack Daniels? And why does every single restaurant have Maker's Mark in this? There's nothing unique about it at all. It doesn't power Canada's economy.
The head of Canada's Craft Distillers Industry Group hopes there may be a silver lining, an opportunity to boost the sales of Canadian-made spirits across Canada.
Sometimes it's harder to move stuff across the provincial border than it is to ship outside of Canada or bring inside of Canada, which is ridiculous.
He's referring to the many provincial regulations, taxes, levies, paperwork, and rules that are there to protect provincial industries but make it difficult to trade between provinces. People are restricted from exporting alcohol between provinces unless it's for personal use.
A lot of companies actually prefer dealing with the U.S. because that trades are actually less restrictive. There are fewer rules, and frankly, some of these markets are more lucrative.
And it goes both ways.
So about $400 million of alcohol comes up from the United States to Canada every single year. Canadians purchase about $110 million of American whiskeys.
He says the current rhetoric on tariffs is destabilizing for a hospitality industry that relies on certainty.
We could replace a large chunk of the products, but certainly not all of them.
But since a north-south trade war seems possible, it may open a door to a different trading environment, east and west. Yvette Brand, CBC News, Vancouver.
A meal delivery service in Kamloops that began just as COVID-19 began overwhelming the world is shutting down this Friday. The Kamloops community meal train started near the onset of the pandemic. Since then, it's handed out almost 80 meals every day to vulnerable people at motels and apartments. The group's founder says it was a hard decision, but its volunteers, quote, cannot be the only daily food security initiative. They hope other agencies, faith groups, and the province will work together to address the hunger problem. There's a look at the day that was in Whistler. Families skating and sledding in Olympic Plaza. Tons of sun, but what about some new snow? Darius will have your BC-wide forecast coming up.
I think it's important to give a human face to the stories that we hear every day, the people that they affect. And I think talking to those people is what really gives us the true sense of the impact of the stories that we're hearing.
BC Children's Hospital says it is seeing an uptick in visits to their emergency department this month and are asking parents and guardians to check a few things before they decide to take their little one to a hospital. Nearly half of those visits, they report, have been for respiratory illnesses. That's up to 180 patients a day. Officials say while the numbers have dropped since the pandemic years, they're still higher than normal. Joining us now for some perspective and analysis, CBC Health columnist Dr. Melissa Lem. We appreciate your time as always. What are some of those signs for parents and guardians that their child may have more than just a little cold?
Dan, we actually have a Made in Canada tool called SIGNS. In fact, that stands for Severe Illness Getting Noticed Sooner. That was put together about 5 years ago by a group of parents and health professionals. And they say to look for 5 things. So the first one is breathing. If they're having trouble breathing, they're having trouble eating or speaking because they're so short of breath, or also if they're breathing very slowly would be one reason to go to the ER. Behavior is another one. If they are not making eye contact, or they're floppy or limp, or having spasms, or again, not behaving like they normally do, that would be another reason. Another thing to look out for is skin. Blue is obviously a bad color, particularly around their lips or tongue. Looking gray, pale, or mottled, particularly if their skin is clammy or cold, is another reason to seek medical attention right away. Fluids too. So if they haven't been drinking or they haven't urinated for at least 8 hours, or if they've been vomiting hourly for 4 hours or more, another alarm sign. And last but not least, if they're not responding to usual treatment, like if they have a chronic disease like asthma or diabetes, and their symptoms aren't getting better with what you do, or they have any of those signs, go to the ER immediately.
And are there any other steps, so the signs idea, any other steps beyond that before you decide, you know what, this is the time to go?
If you're not quite sure and they don't seem very ill, 811 is always available 24/7. You can speak to a registered nurse at any time. Another thing to remember is if you're lucky enough to have a family doctor or nurse practitioner, try to book an urgent appointment with them, or there's some more minor ailments that a pharmacist can help you with. But something else to remember is after hours, if you have a family doctor, they in fact are required to have a schedule where they or one of their colleagues in their practice are available on call, where you can call them for urgent medical attention after hours. So try calling the phone line of your family doctor and get that information so you can speak with a live person.
What are you seeing in your practice when it comes to respiratory illnesses?
I am definitely seeing a lot more coughs, colds, flus, fevers, earaches this time of year for sure. It's cold and flu season. But I would say compared to other years, especially right after we came out of the COVID-19 protections, parents have been through the ringer. Their kids have had viruses now, so they're not quite as concerned, I guess. So they have more, they're more battle worn. They've seen their kids through some respiratory seasons.
And when it comes to if they have to choose emergency care or choose to do that, where should they check to which hospital they should go? Is it always the nearest one?
Well, sometimes it's which hospital has the shortest wait time. So there is a website called edwaittimes.ca that you can check. I have spoken with some of my patients, though, who say they check it, looks like it's half an hour. By the time they get there, it's 2 hours. So the best offense against virus season is really multiple layers of defense.
All right. Dr. Melissa Lem, we always appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Dan.
Hundreds of Rogers customers say they are facing uneven pricing. They're frustrated by what they see as unexpected hikes in their monthly bills. And some even claim trying to dispute the charges shows unequal treatment. Erica Johnson has this Go Public follow.
Okay, I'll have to phone them about that.
When Sharon Vincent saw a price hike on her Rogers bill just a month after signing a 2-year contract,
with Rogers Xfinity,
she called the telco provider to dispute the extra $21 in charges.
I wasn't able to get anything.
As Go Public has reported, last fall, Rogers raised the price of TV box rentals, allowed to hike prices thanks to a contract clause Vincent says wasn't explained.
I don't understand why they would do that. It's a money grab.
We heard from hundreds of angry Rogers customers who felt misled over the price hike. Now there's new grounds for outrage. Some got their bills lowered when they called to complain, but others, no luck.
I just think it's disgusting. You treat all your customers the same way if you want a good, successful business without a lot of complaints.
This MP says he's hearing complaints too from constituents, people who just don't have the time to do battle with Rogers.
It can be used against you as a consumer because you don't get the same benefits that other people that have those skill sets or have that experience or have that time will get.
Frustrating, he says, because big telcos like Rogers have received hundreds of millions from government over the past decade.
So we're being abused by our own product.
Even before the price hike, Rogers customers were fed up with their bills. A recent report from the telco mediator shows that complaints about billing issues jumped over the past year, up 103%. A spokesperson for Rogers wouldn't comment on why some customers get a break and others don't, but said the company works with customers to meet their needs and budget. After we contacted Rogers about Sharon Vincent's case, she called her telecom provider again. Says this time a customer service rep could miraculously knock $18 off her bill. Erica Johnson, CBC News, Vancouver.
U.S. President Donald Trump continues to threaten to impose 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods, and Canadians are being urged to focus their dollars locally. As Corey Bullock explains, a group of mayors has formed an alliance to address the consequences of the possible tariffs.
While Creston may be best known for its sprawling landscapes and fresh fruit and wine, it's also known for its close proximity to the U.S. border. Something that has Creston Mayor Arnold DeBoon concerned for his residents if Trump's tariffs come to be.
There is a real fear here that their lives are going to be very, very negatively impacted.
Creston is about 10 kilometers from the Reichert's border, which crosses into Idaho. DeBoon says many residents rely on that crossing for everything from shopping to employment. And he says the tariffs will undoubtedly affect the 3 lumber mills in the Creston Valley.
We are going to see mills possibly close or at least very much curtail their activities. And they are good paying jobs. It's going to have an impact.
He's also concerned for his neighbors down south. That's why he's helped form the new Border Mayors Alliance to bring awareness to how this could impact communities on either side of the border. It's just one of many signs that officials are preparing for the worst, with many saying buying local is important now more than ever.
And I hope for British Columbians at home, when you're at the grocery store and you have a chance to buy a product right now, you're looking carefully at the labels to support Canadian jobs and to support Canada at this critical time.
A message echoed by Loco BC, the group behind the BC Buy Local campaign, which predates the latest threat of tariffs.
You know, up to 92 cents of every dollar stays recirculating in the Canadian economy when you buy a local product.
She likened it to the COVID-19 pandemic, when support for local businesses soared.
Businesses that maybe provide for the Canadian market, but also export to the U.S. are going to be thinking a lot more about how to focus their distribution to the local market. And so, you know, we really need to support them with increased purchasing from Canadian customers, and that will really help them out.
According to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, every day $3.6 billion in goods crosses the Canada-U.S. border. Corey Bullock, CBC News, Cranbrook.
Tens of thousands of Palestinians are making their way home to northern Gaza, back to what's left of their communities after 15 months of war. Israel opened the key route to the north after a hostage dispute with Hamas was resolved, and the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas remains in place. Chris Brown has the latest from Jerusalem.
In one of the most significant developments of this tenuous ceasefire, Israel removed barricades and hundreds of thousands of uprooted Palestinians streamed into Gaza's north. Sarah Reddy said it was an indescribable feeling of happiness mixed with sadness as she brought along a cat she couldn't leave behind, hoping for a new beginning. Along the way, there were emotional reunions of those who stayed behind, reconnecting with others who fled after more than a year. Those fortunate to have transportation were searched by private security guards for weapons at checkpoints before being allowed through. I'm excited, said Faraz Maqdad, even though I've lost people and my home in the war. Northern Gaza communities such as Jabalia and Gaza City suffered some of the worst destruction. 3/4 of the buildings are rubble, so many people will simply go from sleeping in a tent in the south to another in the north. But coming a day after Donald Trump publicly mused about cleaning out Gaza of Palestinians and moving them to neighboring countries, some said it demonstrated resilience. Ahmed Shakara said, "It's our land, it's where we were born, it's where we were raised." Hamas remains in control, though, and there was video of its fighters welcoming people back.
Some business people,
This Israeli military historian says unless the militant group is replaced, Gaza has no future.
I don't see anybody investing in reconstruction now as long as Hamas will be in power. Israel has to take care to keep that it will actually be the case.
The path north was unblocked after a deal was struck with Hamas over hostage Arbel Yahoud, whose captors released a proof-of-life video. She will now be freed Thursday, along with 2 others and 3 more hostages Saturday. Many fear the ceasefire won't last long enough to return all the captives, as some families in this first round received upsetting news.
25 of our hostages are alive, and 8 have been killed by Hamas.
Who is dead and who is alive has not been made public, creating agonizing moments of hope and dread in the coming days. Chris Brown, CBC News, Jerusalem.
A city in the Democratic Republic of Congo is the scene of intense fighting between government troops and rebels. The rebels made rapid advances against the army on Sunday and are now reportedly patrolling the main streets of Goma in the eastern part of that country. These are scenes from the border post between Goma and neighboring Rwanda. Hundreds of displaced people fleeing the city on foot. In the past 4 years, the rebels have taken control of large parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The Congolese government has accused Rwanda of sending its troops over the border to support those rebels. Rwanda, in turn, has accused Congolese authorities of supporting militias trying to topple the Rwandan government. Today marks 80 years since the liberation of the Nazi death camp Auschwitz, where more than 1 million people, mostly Jews, were starved, tortured, and killed. Today, world leaders gathered not to speak, but to listen. That story is next. Calls are growing for mandatory Holocaust education in schools. With the number of survivors dwindling, Sam Sampson looks at some working to preserve crucial knowledge.
This is our reflection wall.
Holocaust education has always included critical thinking.
Have you fact-checked information? Do you check a source before you put it online?
Educators here and abroad say that's especially the case with the rising influence of social media.
I saw something on Twitter the other day that said Hitler was right. And my stomach just turned. I think it's more important than ever that students and learners of all age be given the opportunity to learn what actually happened.
A major part of Holocaust education has included first-hand storytelling. But as survivors pass away, some of their younger relatives are there to answer questions.
I'd probably ask how it affected, the people around them.
Probably just ask them how they're doing, like if they've had any generational trauma from that. Generations passed down, stuff like that, yeah.
That's, it's interesting.
Steve Schaefer's paternal grandparents survived forced labor camps during the Holocaust. His grandfather died with a tattoo from Auschwitz on his forearm.
I think that almost every Jewish person you talk to wonders who amongst the non-Jewish population around them would feel comfortable hiding them. So in terms of intergenerational trauma, I think almost all Jews suffer from that.
Schaefer pushed Alberta's government for mandatory Holocaust education in schools, something the province is still working on.
Without it, anybody could become the target of an organized, systematic policy whereby they're eradicated.
Schaefer says he won't be intimidated because more than fear, he has hope for the next generation. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Edmonton.
Holocaust survivors and world leaders, meanwhile, have gathered in Poland to mark the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. The Nazis murdered more than 1 million people, most of them Jews, at that concentration camp during the Second World War. Evan Dyer has more on the somber memorial.
80 years after liberation, the ranks of the survivors are thinner. And there's a sense that this will be the last major anniversary with any significant presence of people who survived Auschwitz. People like Miriam Siegler, seen here on the day of liberation, who traveled to Poland from her home in Toronto.
I had a terrible day on Saturday going back to Auschwitz, seeing where I was separated from my family, from my mother and father and my aunt.
These grounds were the site of the largest Nazi concentration and extermination camp. Over nearly 4 years, more than 1 million men, women, and children, the majority Jewish, were murdered here.
I had to honor the people that had died there, that had no families. And the same, my family perished there. And to me, God left me. He left me for a reason. That's the way I feel.
The Soviet Red Army lost over 200 men killed in the battle to liberate the camp. The Russians were once honored guests at these events. The return of war to this region, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine nearly 3 years ago, led the Auschwitz-Birkenau Foundation to ban Vladimir Putin from this site. But Volodymyr Zelensky, the Jewish president of neighboring Ukraine, whose own family lost members in the Holocaust, traveled secretly to be here, among more than 30 heads of state and government. The message of never again, some said, felt particularly urgent. Dr. Leon Weintraub, who survived Auschwitz but lost his mother, said he was grieved to see the rise of a new far right and appealed to his audience to take seriously what the enemies of democracy preach. They really seek to implement those slogans, he warned. That's why many survivors say they feel a need to keep talking and teaching about what happened here.
If you don't nip them in the bud at the start when this happens, it's going to spread as we see now it is spreading. It's a curse.
50 survivors attended this commemoration compared to more than 300 a decade ago. Those who cheated death at this extermination camp are now approaching the end of their natural lives. And the message they sent today was, don't forget what happened here. Evan Dyer, CBC News, at Auschwitz-Birkenau.
On a day like today, people worldwide are pausing to remember the millions of Holocaust victims. That includes survivors now living in Canada. They're sharing their stories because they fear that those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. More now from Sarah Levitt.
I think every survivor's duty is to do that.
The duty, George Reinitz says, to tell their story. The Holocaust survivor was just 12 years old when his family was taken to Auschwitz. Separated from his mother and sister on the first day, he never saw them again. His father, also murdered.
I'm alone, I'm still 12 years old.
Now 93, the Montrealer has spent much of his life sharing accounts of his ordeal in the concentration camp and of all he lost.
And I think it's more important today than ever, because there's still a hate and racism, and I never thought it's going to come back.
It's the 80th anniversary of liberation.
Across Canada, efforts are ongoing to ensure the Holocaust is not forgotten. A group of grade 6 students take in testimony from the daughter of a Holocaust survivor.
My dad was number 71572, my grandfather number 71595, and from that point forward they were no longer a human being with an individual name and identity, they were simply a number in the Nazi regime.
Words that stick for some.
People in the world, even though you didn't do anything to hurt anybody else, some people are just so ruthless that they don't care.
It's important to learn so we can learn from our mistakes. There has been a lot of hate in the world recently, which is not good. So we have to learn more to love each other.
Something on display by those who braved the cold at the National Holocaust Monument in Ottawa.
Together, let us build the world where Auschwitz remains only a historical symbol and not a returning reality.
A prayer for peace, as important now as it was 80 years ago. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Montreal.
Darius Madavi is here with our BC-wide weather forecast and more of that change.
That's right. So we've had this high pressure sitting over at least southern BC, but actually it's been quite widespread, sitting across most of BC, just off the coast here, keeping us dry and sunny. Today, this started to break down a little bit for the northwest as we saw a little bit more precipitation coming in there. But soon it's going to break down pretty much across the province. We'll have low pressure sweep across the north, and that's going to spread some precipitation down here to us. And if we take a look at our atmospheric moisture map, you can see it is feeding in currently up onto the north coast around Stewart. That's why they're getting their precipitation. Once we get into Thursday, it starts to move a little bit further south. We missed the brunt of it. The brunt of it goes south of us down into the States, but we will still start to see some rain and maybe even some snow coming to parts of the south coast across the board. Now here we see on our precipitation map that feeding up into the northwest. For the most part, you can see that heavy snow coming around Stewart in particular as it works its way down, continuing until probably Wednesday midday up around Stewart, and then working its way down the coast, reaching the North Island by Wednesday, and then continuing to make its way down across the south coast. So expect to see some pretty widespread precipitation, especially once we get into the end of this week, also breaking into the southern interior, spreading some snow there as well Thursday into Friday. And overall, we're just looking at definitely a change from the very sunny and dry conditions that we have seen throughout most of January. Temperatures will also be fluctuating quite a bit throughout this week, especially in some places up in the northeast where they have been. Fort Nelson, for instance, has been around 9 degrees. Those temperatures are expected to fall, so expect quite a big change there over the next couple days. If we take a look here, you can see it's starting to come down, but once we get into the end of this week, dropping pretty quickly down here. So in the south, temperatures won't change too much. I'd say they're fluctuating around 5 degrees or so over the next few days. In the interior, 3 degrees or so here on the coast. Our lows might fluctuate a little bit more than that. But up in the north, let's see, minus 11, dropping down closer to minus 25 or so by the time we get into the weekend. Conditions across the province tomorrow are overall looking pretty sunny still tomorrow, with the exception of, again, up in the northwest and up on the north coast. Down here, though, lots more sunshine on the way. So if you are excited for that sunshine, you do still have a couple more days of it. Places where there is cloud in the southern interior, that should be clearing out through the day for a pretty sunny afternoon and then clear evening. And here we go, Dan, 5-day forecast. A little bit more exciting than it was last week. Clearing up tomorrow for sunny skies. Wednesday is also sunny. And then some showers, rain and showers. maybe even some snow coming in for the weekend.
Okay, the mountains will appreciate that. Why don't we have a deep breath?
Let's.
Okay. It's Monday. You're here with some happy science news.
That's right. And today I want to talk about the Amazon, which is often called the lungs of our planet. I prefer to think of it more as the air conditioner of our planet. But it is a massive, sprawling ecosystem, all sorts of ecosystems enclosed within there. And it is incredibly important both to that area and to the world as a whole. It plays a very essential role in regulating our atmosphere and our climate, and especially for that area. Once a certain amount of the Amazon is gone, there's no going back. The rest of it will enter what is called a die-off. And that's why protecting the Amazon is so important. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what has been happening in the region because we have seen over many decades a sort of a dying off of some of this area. But mostly that was happening back a few decades ago. You can see it much higher back here in this area than it has been. But for a while, it was looking like it was starting to spike back up. But good news, in the last year, that has fallen in half, been cut in half, that amount of deforestation, which means that maybe it'll be okay, Dan.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ever had trouble sorting your recycling? Well, a pet parent in Kamloops doesn't have to worry about that. He got Rover to learn to do it. More on the recycling hound after this.
I'm Stephen Quinn, and I love living here in Vancouver, BC. It's a city with world-renowned beauty, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows. In our new daily podcast, This is Vancouver, we're exploring the diverse range of issues and stories in this city, the good, the bad, and everything in between, as told by the people who live it every day. Don't miss This is Vancouver, available wherever you get your podcasts, and I'll talk to you soon.
A Kamloops dog is in the running to become Canada's favorite pet. And for good reason. 9-year-old Jet can do all kinds of useful things, like carrying groceries and sorting recycling.
Jennifer Norwell met the dog and his dad.
My name is Derek Moulter, and I'm currently sitting beside my son, Jet.
Can I help you with recycling?
He's a 9-year-old German Shepherd that I've trained up to a little bit higher level than you typically see in the average household.
You know, just over the years that we've been doing it, I don't even have to tell him which bin it goes in anymore. He just knows. He flips up the garbage can for garbage. You know, he's my rock star. Come here. Hey, I tell him nothing. He lets himself in the house. Once he's done outside, he turns around, closes the door behind him. You know, go bring me my shoes when they're ready to go somewhere. He sorts garbage and recycling for me. He'll carry grocery bags home from the store. It's a point of pride for me. Let's just go. Wait. Hey, where's this going? We got a good life together. Look. He also does your taxes and makes shake and bake.
Hard to get a dog that nets you less chores.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. Good dog.
Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, YouTube, and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
And we'll have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. Good night.